Welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. Today I have a special guest who is an expert in a topic that is an essential part of growing a business, developing talent within a business. Today we're joined by a doctoral candidate at the University of Central Florida, Maria Cherjovsky.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
So this is, to me, a topic that is not really discussed a lot of times around how do you actually get from point A to point B as a business? It's not just about the operations, but how do you actually create a workforce that is integral to that actual transformation and being ready to succeed when you're on your way to point B?
So one of the biggest struggles employers have, unlike what most would think, is not the money, it's not the technology, it's not the processes, it's the people. That's the biggest human capital. It really is our best resource and the most challenging one, not only as far as recruitment, but also retention. And once you recruit them, how do you develop them? We have multiple generations that are currently in the workforce, a diversity of individuals from different nationalities, different belief systems, different priorities. So that is quite the juggle for managers. And the best thing they can do is understand the diversity within their workforce and work on talent development plans for the group as a whole, building culture, building community, but also individually tailored to the individual.
And if you do that, you are going to reap the benefits. Like you will have a more productive workforce, more effective workforce, and happier customers.
Absolutely. So having a developed talent will really reap a lot of benefits for the employer. For starters, they're more productive. Mm-hmm. Happier employees, always more productive.
Sure.
Better relationship building amongst each other, which is critical to team performance. Greater understanding and minimizing or mitigating miscommunication issues that tend to happen quite a bit. Better relationship with leadership, but also longevity. It takes a lot of manpower and a lot of money to recruit and train someone only to lose them after a few months or after a year.
Yeah.
Extremely costly, not to mention the disruption that it causes on the operations in the business. So developing a talent pool that is going to last, stay, who is motivated, who is engaged in contributing is really the best thing an employer can do. So partner with someone like myself or an entity that focuses on workforce development that really focuses indirectly on economic development has a lot of benefit for any employer, whether small or large.
And this isn't just something you're studying. I mean, this is something you've been doing in your entire career for some very large, like Fortune 10 companies.
Correct. Yes, this is something I've been doing since 2000, so quite some time now. Build a reputation doing this. Many may consider me the go-to person when they don't find an off-the-shelf program or online training and they have unique situations that they really cannot figure out that has a ripple effect in the economy and the community. I'm the one that comes in and helps create, using innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, a lot of solutions. So I'm really more of a solutions provider to unique situations above and beyond the typical programmatic portfolio that most people would know me for.
Sure. So, I mean, I can share a couple stories in my own experience as being an entrepreneur. Personally, I've always been a big fan of the Dale Carnegie program. Mm-hmm. I love the teachings about resilience and managing stress and working with others, the interpersonal communications. And I've sent quite a lot of our teammates here at our agency to go get training at Dale Carnegie. It literally changed my life to help me understand what leadership was versus like what I thought it was at the time. And that was about 15 years ago. And then recently I've been exposed to another program called True Colors International. Okay. And what I really enjoyed about that one was that regardless of our backgrounds, there are certain personality traits that help understand like how you might communicate with somebody.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, they use a color spectrum where some people are orange, which is like what you might think orange would be, which is more energetic and creative and not as focused on the organization, but more focused on the vision. And then there's like the very analytical people who are green and they want to know about all the little details. Yeah. And then there's other colors like blue and yellow. And we found that when we tried that program in combination with the Dale Carnegie program that we got, we accomplished two different things. We were able to teach leadership on this side, but we were able to really help facilitate communication within our organization based off of us understanding how our teammates are predisposed to send and receive information, to where it really kind of cleared up a lot of misunderstandings we might have had with one another and made a communication with our clients and each other much more effective.
Absolutely. There are two others that are really well known in that space. One is called Myers-Briggs. The other one is DISC.
Sure.
And they each represent, as you said, a different personality style with different traits, very much misunderstood. The truth of the matter is that we all have each one of those components, and we draw from each one of those based on who we're engaging with. The challenging part is knowing which one to draw from, whether you know the person in front of you.
That's true.
Or where you are emotionally in that moment in time. Are you able to discern which aspect of you to draw out in percent?
Sure.
So for the most part, that's something that we all struggle with. We have our innate abilities and our innate way, like mine in DISC would be an IDDI.
Yeah.
I go back and forth.
I have no idea what that means.
So it means I'm more, it's dominant and innovative. So I'm the cheerleader when I have to really get the team going and make sure that we're all happy and productive and pushing forward. And really building the team and take them to the finish line. The D is when I'm very focused, we have something to get done, and I have to be very decisive with whatever information I have, and there's no room for error, and I'm focused on the goal and the bottom line.
Yeah.
But we all have the other ones. There's an S, which is more supportive.
Right.
So depending on who I am with a team or my partner or whomever, I can take a step back and let somebody else take the lead and say, this is your time, I'll support you.
Yeah.
And then the C is the conscientious one, which is the analytical piece.
Got you.
And I'm very much on data analytics, and I drive everything based on data, and I always pull in data points, and I look at those to make decisions.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me now. It's so difficult for me to understand the acronyms versus colors. For some reason, I just understand the colors better than combinations of acronyms like Myers-Briggs and DISC. It's just hard for me to retain what some of the letters mean.
Yes.
And so I guess it's just depending on the organization, depends on the methodology.
Yeah, the color ones is more fun. So for a team building activity or an icebreaker or a retreat, that's when I would typically use something like that. When I'm working on truly developing a team and then developing training for them on communication, conflict resolution, leadership, assessing if someone has the potential to become a leader.
Yeah.
Right? Or a good manager. Or why is this manager great at what they do, but they're failing at leading a team? Well, because people a lot of times get promoted from within. Nothing wrong with that. But you didn't just earn your promotion because of how much time you spent. And that's a big mistake that happens
That's
very,
a huge
very often.
misconception.
It's a huge just because you could do the job doesn't mean that you can lead people. So I will come in and help assess, why is this person not succeeding in that role? What else can we do? How can we coach that individual?
How does, because I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this that really, that's one of the topics that is most anxiety producing. You may have a very loyal teammate who's been with the organizations for a while. How can you determine whether or not they are a good candidate to lead a team, or whether how do I keep promoting that person within their channel, because that's where they're highest performing, And
that's a great question. And I have to say I have not been asked before, but I do have the answer because I have been in those shoes. We all make mistakes. We learn by doing. And as a leader of many years and many organizations, I have seen potential in people in having dialogue with them and them sharing, yes, I want to go to the next level. I took them for their word. The moment they said that, I wanted to coach them and guide them. And I realized it's not working, still gave them a chance.
Maybe they didn't realize the responsibility that came with some of the
They just thought they didn't realize how much time and effort they needed to put on themselves.
Right.
How much time and effort you need to devote to develop yourself to become that leader. It's not just a title, it's not just a pay.
And it's not always something you're born with. You can work on it.
You can work on it. You can learn it. So I did my part. They didn't always do their part. So when it comes to mentor-mentee coaching programs, that's always the biggest disappointment people talk about. So my mistake was truly believing that if I just push more, if I helped more, the person will make it. It didn't. The person ended up leaving the organization. And as I had a chance to debrief after the disappointment and all the feelings that come with it, because I really cared and we had become friends, I realized that person wasn't ready, and I knew it.
Yeah.
So just because they wanted the title and the money,
just because you
and
wanted
because
it for them,
I wanted it for them, it was not enough reason to do it, and I should have known better. So what is the right approach? Don't rush into promoting someone because you have a vacancy. That's what happens a lot.
That's
we need
some
someone in that
good
role.
advice.
Don't jump into it. You can put someone temporarily. Try it out. That way, there's no hard feelings. They can go back to the prior role. That's a safety measure.
I would imagine you'd really need to set expectations for that too.
You have to set expectations.
Like, we're going to try this for 60 days.
Maybe a little more, 3 to 6 months, right? To get acquainted with the role, getting comfortable with the team. The team dynamic will change as well, because the team doesn't see you as a leader. That takes time too.
Oh, good point.
And so you need to allow time for the entire team to shift their mindset to, we have a new leader. I can't talk to you the way I did before. We may not hang out and have a drink after work anymore. Now there's a different dynamic. That takes time to build. But how is the organization rallying around that individual and coaching them to develop into the manager or leader that they're expected to become?
Yeah.
That's the second area in which most companies fail. Well, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Or go to HR. They have some training. So those are the two safety measures that I think that if we think proactively about those, we are able to do a lot more in terms of supporting those individuals.
I think you touched on a couple of things that I didn't even know they were very different until I did some of the Dale Carnegie work, was that there's skills and knowledge training where, you might be able to watch educational or study really hard and learn the skills of something, but then there's also emotional development.
Absolutely.
And they're very different things. And how do you take inventory of whether or not something is, or what percentage of each a role might be, where it creates a high, there needs to be a high level of emotional development here or skills. Like, how do you factor that into your program development?
This is a human resources person nightmare, because it requires for all job descriptions to be up to date, which by and large, that's never the case. There's always scope creep. There's always additional functions.
Sure.
There's the other duties as assigned, right? So if the job descriptions are thorough, they're detailed, thoroughly spelled out, they're detailed enough, and they can assign percentages to overseeing people, overseeing projects, fiduciary responsibility, execution, right? The more we have those outlined, then you know the kind of candidate you're looking for. The next step will be to provide an assessment, assess the individual.
Yeah.
Not just based on the subjective assessment. Oh, the group loves them. Oh, they're a team leader. Oh, they're the life of the party. Of course they can lead. Well, you can be the life of the party and be liked amongst the team, but maybe you cannot execute. Maybe you're not good at time management. Maybe you're not good at financial management, and you over budget. So they need to do assessments that really help evaluate each of those skill sets. That's why there's such a plethora of assessments out in the market to help with that.
Right.
So once you compare the two, you have a really good foundation to see, are there enough commonalities in place for this individual to move forward? And is the gap something that we can help close through training, through classes, through coaching, or just in time?
Well, one of the things is, especially when it comes to those assessments and their availability, you might have a small company, or it depends on how experienced your HR department is. But there's one thing getting the assessment, and there's another thing like actually implementing it and truly understanding what it means, right?
Correct.
So how important is it to work with someone like yourself with workforce development to truly like understand and like facilitate programming related to workforce development versus just deploying an assessment program through your HR department?
A smaller organization will have more of a challenge working those details in-house because of a couple of reasons. One, everybody wears multiple hats, right? So the job descriptions are not as well delineated as you would expect it in a large organization. So bringing a consultant, bringing someone who volunteers, someone who's an expert in the field, or just taking a class may be enough to get them going, knowing that it's really a temporary patch to the problem, but eventually as they grow, they will see and feel more of the growing pains, and they will have to revisit that time and time again. For smaller organizations, before I move on to the big ones, they have other options. If they're part of the Small Business Development Center, if they're part of an incubator program or have access to one and want to pay to attend some of the training sessions, those are very economical, easily accessible, and then provide them with a lot of opportunities, including some coaching at no cost, where they can really get those resources basically at the tip of their fingertips. But it still does not replace what happens with a coach, a mentor, or a well-established program. So while the small businesses have those options, and at the University of Central Florida, where I worked for a very long time, and I was in charge of continuing education, I actually coached and partnered with their 7 incubators. So overall, they had, I want to say, over 50, 60 clients. And
but
quite
all small
often,
companies, though.
Small companies, startups. Startup does not mean small dollars. Some of them were $1 million companies, but smaller in startups with DoD contracts and such. And some of them were technical, some emerging technologies, some were education, some were soft skills. And quite often they will call me to say, we have this small business that has this idea or they have this challenge.
Sure.
Can you help us with a go-to-market strategy? Can you help us reposition or repurpose their content so they can be more successful? So the reason why I'm sharing that is not so much about my experience, but the fact that those resources exist. And if small businesses knew to seek those out, they really can get a wealth of knowledge and expertise from the university itself, the incubator staff, and people like myself.
Wow. I mean, you brought up some points that it didn't even really occur to me, but now that you talk about it, it makes sense. When I think about go-to-market strategies, a lot of times I'm thinking of advertising, I'm thinking of positioning and things like that. I'm not always thinking about, is the team ready to go to market?
Correct. And that's one piece, right? So I have helped tackle all of those. As my work with the incubators was not really about the people, because there were 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 staff members. Sure. They were hired for specific reasons, and their struggles were a little differently from an established company.
Right.
Today we're focusing on marketing. Tomorrow we're working on product. Then we're working on business development, government contracts, negotiations, legal issues, compliance, whatever it may be. And so that's what I will come in and help with. Okay, let's look at the big picture, look at the strategy. How do we take what you have and make it work in this market or in that market? How can we reposition things? And then they were able to walk away with a outlined plan of action, and everybody knew their role. So it helped them as well. So as far as the talent development piece, to tie the two conversations, it was easier to assign a task if they knew the strengths of each contributing member.
Sure. How do you know as an organization whether you're a good candidate to bring in a consultant to help with workforce development? Like maybe you're a manufacturing company and what you manufacture is something you're going to be doing for the next 10 years. Like there's no risk. Like it might not change. Like are you a good candidate for workforce development, or is it only for innovative companies or companies where there's change? Like how would I know as an organization whether I need to be looking into shopping for this type of a service to come help augment and help supercharge my organization?
By and large, the decision is based on, do we have the talent pool in-house to do what we need to do, deliver on our mission, on budget, right, within budget, and on schedule? If the answer is yes, most often they will not reach out to us. If the answer is maybe, and then the next question will be who?
What are the symptoms that show up in an organization where it's maybe or who?
The symptoms, as you call them, would be productivity levels that are changing, employee surveys, turnover rate for employees. Those are 3 very common ones, and there's many, many more. There's so many KPIs and metrics that I can share, but those are the 3 that will stand out the most. If you see a constant turnover of staff, if your productivity is going down, if your managers are walking out, if you get consistent complaints from a specific division, or if they're clocking in too many overtime hours in a specific area, clearly your capacity is not what it should be. So depending...
Like the one you just said, like might even be something that you think is good, Like you might think, wow, my team's really working hard, but that might also be a symptom that you need to make a change because...
You may not have enough people for the amount of projects and the capacity may not align with the projects and the output that you're expecting. And if that is the case, you may see your people working a lot of extra hours, but burnout is real, and people will eventually leave you. So that's where human resources will step in and say, wait a minute, we're seeing this. Unfortunately, human resources, as they are to consult with division managers, it's really up to the leadership to say, hey, I'm realizing that my payroll has gone up the last quarter. Why? Because overtime hours have not doubled, have tripled.
That's right.
A good leader will take a step back and say, wait a minute, are people clocking in too many hours because of, and then fill in the blanks. What is the reason? What's the symptom that's resulting in that? And when you take a step back and say, wait a minute, we have too many projects and we did not budget accordingly, or we failed to add staffing, whether it's temporary staffing, interns, volunteers, borrow staff from somewhere else. This is where project management comes in.
Yeah.
And with a good critical path and a good plan, you can move pieces around and look at where your resources are needed. So if you have a short-term project that requires more manpower, borrow from another area to staff that team accordingly and then send that person back. Great experience for someone to learn a new skill and help a team that will be hurting otherwise. If that does not happen, that entire team is going to get burnt out and is potentially going to look to switch to another area or leave the company altogether.
Gotcha.
And that's how the turnover happens. So when those symptoms tend to come out, productivity, lack of efficiency, employee surveys, so on and so forth, that's when they will consider, do we do extra training? What do we need to do? How do we change? What are the symptoms? Let's do an employee survey. Let's get some feedback. What's working, what's not working? What do they need? What do they want?
Yeah.
And then they will compare typically with HR. What do we have in training and development? What do we have ready to go? And if they cannot do it or if they don't have the capacity, it's typically HR with leadership who will call someone like myself and say, we need some help. Here's what we know. There may be more that we're missing. Can you help us round out that picture and help us develop a plan of action to overcome the current situation? We're here, we would like to be here. And this is where I will come in and do an entire assessment. So that will be with a private company. And I know that you and I talked about some very large ones before we got started. And but that's very common. Every organization goes through that. Why? Because human capital is our biggest asset.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that's all. That's gold. Everything that you just said. Getting back to some of the basics, like for example, job descriptions. Regardless of the size of the organization, you're going to have job descriptions. And you talked about, hey, they should be up to date. What are some of the best practices as it relates to how up to date your job descriptions need to be, as well as you were talking about scope creep, how detailed they need to be? Like for example, my video department in their job description, they are required to laugh at all of my jokes. See?
I love that one.
I just
joined your team.
Good job. So anyhow, what are some best practices around to?
Those are some of the biggest pain points for human resources professionals. Nobody has the time. Nobody wants to take the time to write a good, thorough job description. However, it is critical, not just because of the performance, but also for compensation parity.
Yeah.
Right? Compensation inequality is a huge issue. Mm-hmm. And you can only ascertain if you're underpaying or overpaying someone if you can truly identify and assess what they're doing and how that compares to someone else. So there's multiple benefits to the job description, but also how much you can throw on one individual.
Yeah. I've noticed, and this is one tool that I've found that's actually, in my opinion, very helpful, and you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, but generative AI has been amazing to be able to write some of these things, because generative AI, like a chat GPT, it's based off of the way it works is it's pattern matching. So if I were to take this job title and I would say, okay, I want this job title, it's going to know that there are a bunch of those job descriptions that look similar to one another.
Yes.
And then I can refine it a little bit and I can say, okay, I want this job description. They're going to focus in these areas with these constraints, go. Mm-hmm. And it can produce a very good draft.
Yes, and there's a lot that you can purchase. There's a national association called Society for Human Resource Management.
Okay.
Members have access to all of that. So there are resources and it's readily available. Mm-hmm. But to your point, they always have to be tailored to the organization.
Right.
Some may be very narrow in terms of your very, very focused on just one task or a couple of tasks simply because of volume.
Yeah.
Others, you may have less volume, but a greater width, right?
Sure.
In terms of the scope of responsibilities.
And then how often do you keep them up to date?
Technically, they should be done annually when they do a performance review.
Year?
When they do a performance review, it's a good time to say, what happened? How has the role changed? We have these new projects coming up. There's some new skill sets that are needed to tackle these new projects. And if those are not updated, then we may not be paying people adequately for the work that they're doing and the skill sets that they have. We also miss the opportunity to assess if that individual is equipped, ready, prepared, and willing to take on those extra functions.
It also seems like potentially, especially when it comes back, I love analytics, but you also would probably want to, for those things and when your assessments, ideally you would want quantifiable things perhaps as much as possible, because otherwise, you might end up with some soft factors like whether or not the employer likes the person, like you wouldn't want something like that to get in the way of properly assessing someone.
Well, the performance review and the analytics really come into play as a way of protecting an organization and individuals from legalities.
Okay.
If a job description is not fully laid out and clear, when the time comes for the performance review, which is a subjective process, right? A manager or leader may say, you performed excellent here, great over here, not so well on these. But if those items where the individual presumably did not perform well enough was not explained properly, outlined properly, or even trained to do that, can we truly lower the scores and penalize them if there was a bonus potentially, or the opportunity for upper mobility?
Or how do you know what you're doing is sufficient? Like maybe you are sufficiently training. Like how do you even define that?
Well, we can have a whole discussion on HR, and I can do that too. But those are some of the challenges, because you have to have clear guidelines so that when the time comes to do those performance evaluations, technically they should be assessing quarterly and have touch points with their teams.
That's a best practice. Quarterly.
Absolutely. Because you can't wait until the end of the year and I have been collecting all these notes.
That's a lot of times for frustrations to build up.
It really
on both
does.
sides.
And it's very hard to have someone come around and overcome that dynamic. Feedback is very hard to give and even tougher to receive. So if you provide constant feedback, people can pivot, they can adjust, you can put a plan together, you can coach them, you can train them. And if you've done everything and they're still not performing, then you have the reason and the rationale and documentation to now say, this is why you did not get your bonus. This is why you did not get the promotion. But if the job description is not laid out properly, clear enough, sometimes it's not even shared or signed by the individual, which is accepting a contract in a way. And then you wait until the end of the year to provide feedback. And now they're surprised because they thought they were performing and your opinion is different. Now you're looking at some potential legalities.
Really? Well, let's pivot a little bit. You have, with all of these skills that you've acquired over the years and the work that you've done and the education that, like I said, you're defending your dissertation right now. So what are you doing currently? Like, how have you taken those skills? Because you've taken a leap from this corporate development workforce, and now you're applying it into, seems like a passion area.
Yes. So the years that I spent working in academia is not really the traditional higher education. I worked really with the community, locally, regionally, state, national, and even international, developing programs to develop a workforce in areas that were emerging technologies or a pipeline of people did not really exist, or also organizations in transition. That taught me basically everything about business, right? Running a training organization with a social responsibility aspect. We were really transforming lives, helping people become experts in a field by going from point A to point B in the shortest amount of time, finding the path of least resistance so they can become efficient, productive, but more than anything, self-sufficient and independent.
Right.
So in order to do that, that's how I would develop programs, but I had to go to market, have my budgets, develop content, contract people, partner, and I can share some examples. So all of that taught me really a 360 of business And eventually I did establish some businesses of my own. But I took that expertise knowing that I was catering to unique demographics that for whom the one-size-fits-all did not really apply. Not everybody can go through 4 years of college. An example you and I talked about is people migrating from another country. They may be a physician.
Or transitioning out of the military.
Right. So there may be a physician, there may be a dentist, there may be an accountant, there may be an engineer. Some of those professions, they cannot get licensed in the U.S.
Yeah.
So those individuals needed opportunities to make a good living, be proud of what they do, provide for their families, and that's where I stepped in. So understanding those demographics really introduced me to nonprofits and how many nonprofits really cater to many of those unique demographics. Veterans was one of them. So in 2018, I decided to take a leap of faith. I was offered an opportunity with Goodwill, and I was hired as Vice President for Mission Services and Workforce Innovation to basically take all of their workforce programs, grants, voc rehab, VA, unemployed, homeless, children with disabilities, you name it. And how does that organization, Goodwill, take the revenue from selling donated goods and turn that into opportunities to uplift individuals?
Yeah, Goodwill's
in
a phenomenal
futures.
organization.
So,
if you have a chance to learn about obviously because you work with them, but I learned about their entire business model, and it is quite good across the board. They're able to help lots of populations that need to make a living,
Absolutely.
And they have a great business model, the whole thing. It's really quite a powerful story.
So they hired me as their vice president to oversee all of that.
Wow.
Because the background that I had aligned perfectly with what that role was. So I did that for a while and helped transform all of the programs.
Makes sense. It's like literally their mission.
It is. It is. And I didn't know that, but that's how destiny works. And I realized that I had a unique ability to assess organizations because of all my work by not only working at the university, but working with the incubators and constantly coaching and helping businesses. I had developed that ability to do a 360 in any business and assess what are the loopholes, what are the holes that we need to plug, what are your challenges, what are your weaknesses, what's an opportunity. And the more companies and individuals that I coached, the faster I became at doing that. So when I went to Goodwill, within less than a year, we transformed the organization.
That's great.
Rebuild the foundation, processes, services. We didn't even need all the money to come from retail. Only half of my budget came from retail. The other half I was actually securing through grants, donations, and marketing. So it helped shift those dollars to other areas in need as well. So once I did that, I was recruited to become the president of a chamber of commerce. So that pushed me out of my comfort zone to become more involved in
Sounds like that happened twice.
In the community, yes. And from that, it sort of took a shape of its own. I started another nonprofit working on disability inclusion, that I ran for 3.5 years. And then the more people knew me, the more they will call and ask me for help. A lot of times I give my help freely. Sometimes I consult as well. And from there on, I worked with the Department of Elder Affairs during COVID, helping with seniors who were isolated at home, and Meals on Wheels, and helping provide an opportunity for them to connect with people. And I moved on. Then they asked me to take over Coalition for the Homeless as their COO. And they were looking to pursue a new building and capital campaign. And I've done capital campaigns, and I've done the performance and the feasibility studies. And they said, we need a COO. And again, for them to pursue that, we needed to rebuild the foundation.
Wow, you're really stretching.
I did that. So I love to learn. I am just a forever student. I really thrive in an environment where I can give, but I can get just as much. And sometimes I get even more.
Yeah.
It challenges me to think more, to be efficient, effective in what I do, and also pick up the pace, because now that's my passion. The more organizations I'm able to help, the greater the community impact and the collective impact that we have. So I've been coming into organizations where I become what I've been called now a disruptor by some people. Others, with a more positive tone, they call me a force multiplier.
Yep.
Because as I'm able to transform the organization, then their impact is just unmeasurable. I mean, it's limitless. And so I did that for the Coalition for the Homeless. I got a call to take on that role. And then I joined a national organization on rare diseases. So now I had to learn about that.
Oh, my goodness.
And I've been doing that as well. And about 11 months ago, I got a call and got recruited. I was asked to come and lead the Camaraderie Foundation, which takes me right back to many of the things I've done in my entire career and focus on veterans, which have been a very big part of everything I have done in the last 27 years.
And now you're the CEO.
I am the CEO.
Wow, what an adventure. How do people follow you or learn from your thought leadership? How would they reach out and contact you to learn more?
LinkedIn is the best way. I give a lot of presentations in the community. I do podcasts. I visit with companies who want to learn more about not only my experience, if it's going to inspire someone, also my leadership thoughts and ideals, how I approach projects, which I have my own unique methodology as well. You have to when you manage as many as I do. But also about camaraderie. I mean, everybody loves to give back to veterans, and we support, our mission really is healing the invisible wounds of war, which means providing mental health services, transition services, employment services, mental leadership for veterans, active service members, and their families. And one piece that most people do not realize is that we do not receive any state or governmental funding. Everything that we do is at zero cost to the veterans and is all through the events that we hold and donations.
Wow, that's fantastic. And it sounds like you are uniquely qualified to lead an organization like that. Well, thank you for coming in and talking to us. I think we learned a ton about how to properly manage our organizations and
thank you so much.
Learn how to stretch our own selves and grow. You can find us anywhere where podcasts are found, on the Bake More Pie social media feeds, as well as the Law of Relevancy media feeds. Thank you for joining us, Maria.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We'll see you guys next time.